The beautifully wrapped gift box sat on the white tablecloth between the birthday candles and my untouched slice of chocolate cake. My sister Jessica smiled that particular smile she reserved for moments when she was about to humiliate me in front of our entire extended family. The upscale restaurant buzzed with weekend dinner conversations, but our table had fallen into an expectant silence as I lifted the lid of the elegant box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a DNA testing kit with a handwritten note taped to the top. I read it aloud without thinking. Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake in our family. The words hit the air like a physical blow, and I watched my parents' faces drain of color while my cousins and aunts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The drive home from that disastrous birthday dinner felt longer than usual, but it gave me time to think about all the small moments that had led to this humiliating revelation. I had always known something was different about my place in our family, but I had never been able to put my finger on exactly what it was. The differences went far beyond the obvious physical traits that everyone pretended not to notice. When I was 8 years old, I remember hiding behind the kitchen door during one of our family barbecues, listening to my Aunt Martha whisper urgently to my mother about that summer when everything changed. I did not understand what they meant then, but the hushed tone and the way my mother kept glancing nervously toward the backyard where I was supposed to be playing with my cousins made me realize they were talking about something important that I was not supposed to hear. The physical differences had been apparent to everyone since I was a toddler. While my parents and Jessica shared the same golden blonde hair and bright blue eyes, I had inherited dark brown hair that was almost black, and green eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. My father was tall and lean with the kind of build that suggested he had been an athlete in college, and my mother had delicate features that made her look younger than her actual age. Jessica had gotten the best of both their looks with long blonde hair that she wore in perfect waves, and the kind of natural beauty that made people stop and stare when we walked into restaurants together. But it was more than just our appearances that set me apart from the rest of my family. While they spent their weekends at the country club playing tennis and sailing on the lake, I was drawn to working with my hands and figuring out how things worked. My father collected vintage wines and could spend hours discussing the subtle differences between various French regions, but I preferred spending my time in the garage, taking apart old engines and rebuilding them from scratch. My mother loved hosting dinner parties where she could show off her knowledge of art history and interior design, while I found myself gravitating toward the blue-collar workers who came to fix our plumbing or repair our roof. The questions from other people started early and never really stopped. When I was in elementary school, other kids would look at our family photos and ask me why I looked so different from everyone else. Their parents would quickly shush them and change the subject, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. During high school, my guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, pulled me aside during college preparation meetings to ask awkwardly about my biological background, as if she was trying to help me apply for scholarships specifically designed for students from diverse families. Jessica had been excluding me from family activities for as long as I could remember, but she did it in ways that were subtle enough that our parents never seemed to notice. When she created photo albums of our family vacations, she would carefully select pictures that did not include me, or she would crop me out of group shots before posting them on social media. When she introduced me to her friends, she would always add that I was her half-brother, even though our parents had never used that term to describe our relationship. Whenever I tried to bring up these inconsistencies with my parents, they would become defensive and change the subject quickly. My mother would busy herself with household tasks, cleaning things that were already clean, and rearranging furniture that did not need to be moved. My father would retreat to his home office and close the door, leaving me standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. The medical records I found in my mother's desk drawer 3 years ago had been the most concrete evidence that something was not right about my birth story. According to the hospital paperwork, my mother had been admitted for complications during delivery on the day I was supposedly born. But when I checked the dates against the passport, I found in the same drawer, I discovered that she had been traveling through Europe during that entire month, with entry and exit stamps that proved she had not been anywhere near a hospital in our hometown. That night, after finding those records, I sat in my apartment staring at the DNA testing kit Jessica had given me for my 32nd birthday. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend this whole humiliating evening had never happened. But another part of me needed to know the truth about who I really was and where I had come from. I had spent 32 years feeling like I did not quite belong in my own family, and maybe it was time to find out why. 3 weeks after I submitted my saliva sample, the email notification appeared in my inbox at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. My hands shook slightly as I logged into the testing company's website and navigated to my results page. I had expected the test to confirm what I had always suspected, that I was adopted and had no biological connection to the people who had raised me. What I discovered instead was far more complicated and surprising than anything I could have imagined. The results showed that I shared significant DNA markers with a woman named Caroline Mitchell, who lived in Portland, Oregon. According to the genetic analysis, we were half-siblings who shared the same biological father. There was no genetic connection whatsoever between me and my parents or Jessica. The people I had called family for 32 years were complete strangers from a biological standpoint. I spent the next several hours researching everything I could find about Caroline Mitchell online. Her social media profiles painted the picture of a successful woman in her mid-30s who worked as an architect for a prestigious firm in downtown Portland. She was married to a man named David, who taught high school mathematics, and they had 2 children, a 10-year-old daughter named Emma and a 7-year-old son named Lucas. Their family photos showed them hiking through the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, building sandcastles on Oregon beaches, and celebrating birthdays in a cozy house filled with bookshelves and artwork. Caroline had been searching for biological family members through the same DNA testing service, and the system had automatically notified her when my results came back as a genetic match. When I finally worked up the courage to call the phone number listed on her profile, she answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting for my call. "Tommy," she said before I even had a chance to introduce myself. "I have been hoping you would contact me ever since I got the notification about our DNA match." Her voice was warm and familiar, even though we had never spoken before. There was something about her tone that reminded me of myself, a quality I had never heard in the voices of my adoptive family members. We talked for over 2 hours that first evening, sharing stories about our childhoods and trying to piece together the puzzle of our shared parentage. Caroline explained that our biological father was a man named Harrison Webb, who had owned a chain of luxury car dealerships throughout the Pacific Northwest. Harrison had been married briefly to Caroline's mother in the early 1990s, but their marriage had ended in divorce when Caroline was just 3 years old. Despite their divorce, Harrison had remained involved in Caroline's life, paying for her education and maintaining regular contact until his death 6 months earlier. "Harrison always told me he suspected he had another child somewhere," Caroline said during one of our nightly phone conversations. "He mentioned a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who had worked as his personal assistant in 1991. He said they had a brief relationship, but she disappeared suddenly, and he never saw her again. He spent years hiring private investigators to try to track her down, but they never found any trace of her, or any children she might have had." The name Elena Rodriguez meant nothing to me, but Caroline promised to send me copies of the documents Harrison had left behind about his search for his missing son. According to his notes, Elena had been a 25-year-old woman from New Mexico who had worked for Harrison's company for less than a year before vanishing without any forwarding address or explanation. "There is something else you need to know," Caroline said during our third phone conversation. "Harrison died without a will, but he left very specific instructions with his estate attorney about what should happen if his missing son was ever found. He wanted to make sure you received your share of his inheritance, which includes money, property, and shares in the family business. The inheritance was substantial, over $2 million in cash, and investments, a vacation home on the Oregon coast, and a 20% stake in Webb Luxury Automotive, which generated significant annual profits. But Caroline explained that there was a catch. The estate attorney needed official DNA confirmation and legal documentation before any money could be transferred, and there were complicated tax implications that would require months of legal work to resolve. "The attorney's name is Margaret Sullivan," Caroline said. "She has been trying to locate you for months, following leads from Harrison's old private investigator files. She even hired someone to check death records and military service databases, trying to figure out what happened to Elena Rodriguez's son." That evening, I stared at Margaret Sullivan's business card and tried to process everything I had learned over the past few weeks. My entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies, but somewhere out there was a man who had spent years searching for me, wanting to give me opportunities and advantages I had never imagined possible. The question now was whether I was ready to contact his attorney and potentially change my life forever. Margaret Sullivan's law office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. When I walked into her reception area the following Thursday morning, I felt underdressed in my khaki pants and button-down shirt, surrounded by leather furniture and oil paintings that probably cost more than I made in a year at my job managing a small auto parts store. Margaret herself was a woman in her early 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of confidence that comes from decades of handling complicated legal matters. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into her private office, where she had spread out dozens of documents across a polished conference table. "I have been searching for you for 8 months," she said, settling into her chair and opening a thick manila folder. Harrison Webb left very detailed instructions about locating his missing son, and he provided me with substantial resources to conduct that search. What I discovered during my investigation might be difficult for you to hear, but I believe you deserve to know the complete truth about your background. Margaret explained that Harrison had hired private investigators as early as 1992 to try to locate Elena Rodriguez after she stopped coming to work and disappeared from her apartment without notice. The investigators had tracked Elena to a small town in Northern California, where she had given birth to a son in a local hospital before dying in a car accident when the child was 3 years old. Elena was driving home from her job at a grocery store when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car, Margaret said, reading from a police report. She died instantly, but a woman named Patricia Davis was listed as the emergency contact for Elena's son. Patricia and her husband Robert were distant relatives of Elena's family, and they agreed to take custody of the boy rather than let him go into the foster care system. Patricia and Robert Davis were my adoptive parents, the people I had called Mom and Dad for my entire life. According to Margaret's investigation, Harrison had located the Davis family in 1994 and had been making monthly payments of $3,000 to support my upbringing ever since. The payments were described as educational and living expense assistance in the legal documents, but there had never been any requirement for the Davis family to tell me about Harrison's involvement in my life. "Harrison was very specific about maintaining your privacy," Margaret continued. "He did not want to disrupt your childhood or cause confusion about your family relationships. His plan was to contact you directly when you turned 18, but Patricia and Robert Davis convinced him to wait until you were older and more emotionally mature." The monthly payments had continued for 32 years, totaling nearly $1.2 million that my adoptive family had received to help with my care education and general expenses. Harrison had also paid for my college tuition directly, though the payments had been made through a scholarship foundation he had established to hide his involvement. "There is something else you should know," Margaret said, her expression becoming more serious. "Your sister Jessica has known about Harrison's payments for several years. Patricia Davis told Jessica about the arrangement when Jessica graduated from college because they wanted her to understand why they were able to afford certain luxuries that would not have been possible on Robert's income alone. Jessica had been sworn to secrecy about the payments, but according to Margaret's investigation, Jessica had been tracking the money carefully and had even suggested to my parents that they should save some of the funds for her own children's future education expenses. The revelation that Jessica had known about my true parentage, while continuing to exclude me from family activities and make cruel comments about my place in the family, felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything else I had learned. "Unfortunately, there is a complication," Margaret said, pulling out another set of documents. "Harrison's estate includes a provision that if his missing son is found and chooses to claim his inheritance, all previous payments to the adoptive family must be repaid in full. The Davis family would owe the estate approximately $1.2 million plus interest and penalties for not reporting the payments as income on their tax returns." The financial implications were staggering. My adoptive father's small accounting firm generated modest profits that barely covered their middle-class lifestyle. My parents lived in a house they could not afford without Harrison's monthly payments, drove cars that were beyond their means, and had based their retirement planning on the assumption that the payments would continue indefinitely. If they were suddenly required to repay over $1 million, they would face immediate bankruptcy and potentially criminal charges for tax fraud. Margaret explained that I had several options moving forward. I could claim my full inheritance and force my adoptive family to repay the money, effectively destroying their financial security. I could refuse the inheritance and allow the payments to continue, leaving my adoptive family comfortable, but giving up my own birthright. Or I could work with Margaret to find a middle ground that protected both my interests and theirs. "There is one more thing," Margaret said, reaching for her phone. "I attempted to contact your family several times over the past few months, but someone claiming to be Jessica Davis told my office that you had died while serving in the military. That false information nearly derailed the entire inheritance process, and it required extensive investigation to verify that you were still alive and living in the same city where you were raised." The realization that Jessica had actively tried to prevent me from learning about my inheritance was the final piece of a puzzle that revealed the true depth of her selfishness and manipulation. She had not only known about my biological father and his financial support, but she had also tried to steal my inheritance by lying to his attorney about my death. As I left Margaret's office that afternoon, I carried with me a thick folder full of documents that would change my relationship with my adoptive family forever. The question was no longer whether I would confront them about their decades of deception, but how I would handle the revelation in a way that served justice, while preserving whatever genuine love might still exist between us. The Davis family house looked exactly the same as it had throughout my childhood, but everything felt different as I pulled into the driveway that Saturday morning. The carefully maintained lawn, the fresh coat of paint on the shutters, the luxury cars parked in the garage, all of it had been paid for with money from a man I had never known existed until a few weeks ago. I found my parents in the kitchen sharing coffee and reading the newspaper like they did every weekend morning. My father was wearing his favorite weekend outfit of khaki pants and a polo shirt, while my mother had on one of her casual dresses that somehow managed to look expensive despite being designed for household chores. They both looked up when I walked through the back door, and I could see immediately that they knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," I said, setting Margaret Sullivan's folder on the kitchen counter between us. "About Harrison Webb, Elena Rodriguez, and 32 years of monthly payments that you never told me about." The color drained from my mother's face, and my father's coffee cup slipped from his hands, shattering against the tile floor and sending hot liquid splashing across the room. Neither of them moved to clean up the mess, and the silence stretched between us for what felt like several minutes before my father finally found his voice. "How did you find out?" he asked quietly, his shoulders sagging as if a weight he had been carrying for decades had suddenly become too heavy to bear. I explained about the DNA test results, my contact with Caroline Mitchell, and my meeting with Margaret Sullivan. With each new piece of information I shared, my parents seemed to shrink further into themselves, until they looked like frightened children who had been caught in an elaborate lie. My mother was the first to break down completely. She buried her face in her hands and started sobbing, her whole body shaking with the force of emotion she had been holding back for over 3 decades. "Elena was dying in that hospital," she said through her tears. "She was only 28 years old, and she begged us to take care of you as if you were our own son. She said she did not have any other family who could raise you properly, and she was terrified that you would end up in foster care with strangers who might not love you the way you deserve to be loved." My father reached across the table and took my mother's hand, and for the first time in my life, I saw him cry. Not just a few tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere buried deep in his chest. "We were broke." He admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "My accounting practice was failing. We were 3 months behind on our mortgage, and we had already maxed out every credit card we could qualify for. When Harrison Webb contacted us and offered to help with your expenses, we thought it was a miracle. We never imagined the payments would continue for so long, or that they would become such a large part of our income." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Jessica's car pulling into the driveway. She had been coming by every Saturday morning for the past few years to have breakfast with our parents and let her children play in their backyard while she caught up on family news. When she walked through the front door and saw me sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret Sullivan's documents spread out in front of me, her face went pale, and she stopped walking as if she had hit an invisible wall. "You were not supposed to find out," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I told that lawyer you were dead. I gave her detailed information about your supposed military service and everything. How did she figure out I was lying?" The casual way she admitted to her deception was almost more shocking than the deception itself. Jessica was not apologetic or embarrassed about having tried to steal my inheritance. Instead, she seemed annoyed that her plan had not worked, and frustrated that I had managed to discover the truth despite her efforts to prevent it. "Do you have any idea what you have done to this family?" Jessica continued, her voice rising as her initial shock gave way to anger. "Dad's business depends on that monthly payment. Mom and Dad's retirement planning is based on that income continuing. My kids' college funds are invested money that came from those payments. You are about to destroy everything we have built over the past 30 years. My father tried to interrupt, but Jessica was not finished. She pulled out her phone and showed me a spreadsheet that tracked every dollar my family had received from Harrison Webb over the years. She had been monitoring the payments carefully and had even calculated the compound interest they could earn by investing portions of the money in stocks and bonds. I have been saving money from those payments for Emma and Lucas to go to college," she said, referring to her children. "Those kids are counting on having their education paid for, and now you want to take that away from them just because some man you never met left you money in his will." The revelation that Jessica had been using Harrison's money to fund her own children's future education was the most selfish thing I had ever heard. She had spent years making cruel comments about my place in our family, knowing full well that I was the reason her children would be able to afford private schools and college tuition. My mother stopped crying long enough to look up at Jessica with an expression of horror and disappointment that I had never seen on her face before. "Jessica Lynn Davis," she said, using my sister's full name in the tone she had reserved for serious disciplinary conversations when we were children. "How could you say such terrible things? How could you try to steal money that belongs to your brother?" But Jessica was not backing down. She put her phone away and crossed her arms over her chest, staring at me with undisguised resentment. "He is not my real brother," she said coldly. "He never was. He is just some stranger's kid that you agreed to raise for money. I am the only real child in this family, and I am the one who should inherit everything when you and Dad die. I should not have to compete with someone who is not even related to us for resources that rightfully belong to me." The words hung in the air like poison, and I could see that my parents were as shocked by Jessica's cruelty as I was. My father stood up from the table and walked over to where Jessica was standing. his face flushed with anger I had never seen before. "You will apologize to your brother right now," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Tommy has been part of this family since he was 3 years old, and we have loved him exactly the same way we love you. The fact that he is not our biological son does not change anything about his place in this family or our feelings for him." But Jessica just laughed a harsh sound that contained no warmth or humor. "You loved him because Harrison Webb paid you to love him," she said. "Every birthday present, every Christmas gift, every family vacation, it was all paid for with money that came from his real father. You never would have been able to afford to raise 2 children on Dad's income alone, and you know it." That was when I realized that Jessica's cruelty had not just been directed at me over the years. She had been manipulating our parents, using their financial dependence on Harrison's payments to control their behavior and ensure that her needs always came first. She had turned our family's economic situation into a weapon she could use against anyone who threatened her position as the favored child. The confrontation continued for another hour, with accusations and revelations flying back and forth across the kitchen table. By the time Jessica finally left, slamming the front door behind her, my parents and I were emotionally exhausted and no closer to resolving the fundamental questions about our family's future. But one thing had become clear: the relationship between Jessica and the rest of our family was broken beyond repair, and it was going to take more than apologies and explanations to fix the damage that had been done by decades of lies and financial manipulation. The next few weeks brought a series of revelations that made the initial family confrontation seem like just the beginning of a much larger and more complicated crisis. Margaret Sullivan called me on a Tuesday morning to explain that Jessica's lie about my death had created serious legal complications that would require court intervention to resolve. "When your sister contacted my office 6 months ago, claiming you had died in military service, she provided falsified documents that appeared to be from the Department of Defense," Margaret explained during our phone conversation. "She went to considerable effort to make her story believable, including fake death certificates and burial records. Creating and submitting false government documents is a federal crime that could result in significant jail time if the authorities decide to pursue charges." The investigation into Jessica's deception had uncovered additional problems with how my adoptive family had been handling Harrison Webb's monthly payments. According to Margaret's forensic accountant, my parents had been reporting the payments as gifts from relatives on their tax returns, which allowed them to avoid paying income taxes on over $1 million they had received over the years. "The Internal Revenue Service is now involved," Margaret continued. "Your adoptive parents could face charges for tax evasion in addition to the requirement that they repay the money to Harrison's estate. The penalties and interest alone could add several $100,000 to what they already owe. My father's small accounting firm was already struggling financially, and the prospect of owing over $1 million to Harrison's estate, while also facing potential criminal charges, was threatening to destroy everything he had built over his career. His business clients were beginning to learn about the investigation, and several of them had already terminated their relationships with his firm, rather than risk being associated with someone under federal investigation for tax fraud. The social implications were equally devastating for my family. Our hometown was small enough that news about the inheritance dispute and Jessica's fraudulent documents had spread quickly through the community. My parents could not go to the grocery store or attend church services without facing whispered conversations and judgmental stares from people they had known for decades. Caroline Mitchell had been calling me regularly to offer emotional support and help me navigate the legal complexities of claiming my inheritance. During one of our conversations, she mentioned that Harrison Webb had left detailed letters specifically for me expressing his regret about missing my childhood and explaining his hopes for what I would do with the resources he was leaving behind. "Harrison wanted you to know that he never stopped thinking about you," Caroline said. "He blamed himself for not trying harder to maintain contact with Elena Rodriguez, and he spent years wondering what kind of man his son had grown up to become. He would be proud of how you are handling the situation with your adoptive family. But I was not sure I was handling the situation well at all. The inheritance that was supposed to provide me with financial security and opportunities was instead tearing apart the only family I had ever known. Jessica's marriage was becoming strained as her husband learned about her deceptive behavior and began questioning other aspects of their relationship. My parents were facing bankruptcy and potential imprisonment because of their involvement in what was looking more and more like an elaborate financial fraud. The legal proceedings dragged on for months with depositions and document reviews that revealed new layers of deception and financial mismanagement. Jessica had not only intercepted mail from Margaret Sullivan's office, but she had also been forging documents and signatures to maintain control over the family's financial arrangements. Her attempts to prevent me from learning about my inheritance had involved elaborate lies to multiple attorneys, government agencies, and financial institutions. During one particularly difficult deposition, Jessica broke down and admitted that she had been planning to claim Harrison Webb's inheritance for herself if she had succeeded in convincing his estate attorney that I was dead. She had researched the legal requirements for inheriting money from distant relatives and had been preparing to present herself as Harrison's only surviving heir. "I worked so hard to protect this family's financial security," she said through tears during her testimony. Tommy was going to ruin everything by claiming money that we had been depending on for over 30 years. I did what I thought was necessary to preserve our way of life. But her confession only made things worse for everyone involved. The revelation that she had been planning to commit inheritance fraud in addition to her other crimes meant that she was now facing potential federal charges that could result in decades in prison. Her husband hired his own attorney and began divorce proceedings to protect himself and their children from the legal and financial consequences of Jessica's actions. Margaret Sullivan presented me with several options for resolving the inheritance dispute, but none of them offered easy solutions that would protect everyone's interests. I could claim my full inheritance and force my adoptive family to repay Harrison's money, which would result in their immediate financial ruin. I could refuse the inheritance entirely, which would allow the payments to continue, but would mean giving up my own financial future. Or I could pursue a compromise that would satisfy the legal requirements while minimizing the damage to my adoptive family. But there was one additional option that Margaret had not initially mentioned. Harrison Webb's will included an escape clause that would allow me to forgive the debt my adoptive family owed to his estate. If I chose to exercise that option, my parents could keep the money they had already received, but future payments would cease, and I would inherit the remainder of Harrison's assets. The decision about how to use that escape clause would determine not just my own financial future, but also the fate of the people who had raised me and the sister who had betrayed me. It was a level of power and responsibility that I had never imagined having, and I was not sure I was wise enough or mature enough to use it properly. After weeks of sleepless nights and countless conversations with Caroline Mitchell and Margaret Sullivan, I finally developed a plan that would address each member of my family according to their specific actions and level of responsibility for the decades of deception I had endured. The plan was not based on revenge or cruelty, but rather on the principle that genuine accountability requires consequences that are proportional to the harm that has been caused. The first part of my strategy focused on my adoptive father and his struggling accounting firm. Rather than destroying his business by forcing immediate repayment of Harrison Webb's money, I used a portion of my inheritance to purchase his company, outright making myself his employer and giving me direct control over his professional future. The purchase price was fair, but not generous, and it came with strict conditions about business ethics and performance standards that my father would need to meet in order to keep his job. "You will earn your salary from now on," I told him during our first meeting as employer and employee. "No more easy money from mysterious monthly payments. No more cutting corners on your tax obligations. No more lies to clients or family members about where your income comes from. You will run this business with complete honesty and transparency. or you will find yourself looking for work somewhere else." My father accepted the terms without argument, and I could see that he was actually relieved to finally be free from the financial arrangements that had controlled his life for over 30 years. He threw himself into improving the accounting firm with an energy and dedication I had never seen from him before, as if he was finally able to take pride in work that was entirely his own effort. The consequences for Jessica were more severe, reflecting her greater level of responsibility for the lies and deception that had damaged our family. I withdrew my financial support for her children's private school tuition, forcing her to enroll Emma and Lucas in public schools, like every other middle-class family in our community. I also required her to attend a public family gathering where she would have to apologize to everyone present and admit the full extent of her lies about my parentage and my supposed death. "You will stand up in front of our entire extended family and tell them exactly what you did," I informed her during a tense phone conversation. "You will explain how you intercepted legal mail, lied to attorneys, and tried to steal an inheritance that belonged to your brother. You will apologize not just to me, but to everyone whose trust you violated with your selfish behavior." The public apology was one of the most difficult things Jessica had ever been forced to do, but it was necessary for rebuilding the trust that had been destroyed by her actions. Standing in front of 30 relatives at our annual family reunion, she read a prepared statement that detailed her lies and manipulation, while accepting full responsibility for the harm she had caused. However, I was not completely heartless in my treatment of Jessica's children. I established college funds for Emma and Lucas, but with strict conditions that required them to maintain good grades, perform community service, and demonstrate the kind of character and integrity that their mother had failed to show. The money would be available for their education, but only if they proved themselves worthy of the opportunities it would provide. For my adoptive mother, the consequences were focused on emotional healing, rather than financial punishment. I required her to attend counseling sessions with a family therapist who specialized in adoption and family dysfunction. The therapy was designed to help her understand how her passive acceptance of lies and financial manipulation had contributed to our family's problems, and to develop healthier ways of communicating and maintaining relationships. "You enabled Jessica's behavior for years by refusing to confront her when she excluded me from family activities," I explained during one of our difficult conversations. "You allowed Dad to make financial decisions based on deception, without asking hard questions about where the money was coming from. You need to learn how to be honest about problems, instead of just hoping they will go away on their own." The therapy sessions were painful for my mother at first, but gradually, she began to develop insight into her own role in our family's dysfunction. She started setting boundaries with Jessica and demanding honesty in ways she had never been able to do before. She also began building a genuine relationship with me, based on truth, rather than the financial obligations that had shaped our interactions for so many years. Caroline Mitchell helped me establish a new branch of Webb Luxury Automotive in our hometown, creating a legitimate business that would provide employment opportunities for local residents, while honoring Harrison Webb's legacy in the automotive industry. The dealership specialized in high-end vehicles for customers who appreciated quality and craftsmanship, and it quickly became profitable due to my knowledge of cars and Caroline's business expertise. Running the dealership also gave me an opportunity to help other adopted children in our community connect with their biological families. I partnered with local social services agencies to provide resources and support for adoption searches, using some of Harrison Webb's money to fund DNA testing and legal assistance for families who could not afford those services on their own. Jessica's social standing in our community crumbled as people learned about her manipulative behavior and fraudulent activities. The women she had considered her closest friends began excluding her from social gatherings and volunteer activities, unwilling to associate with someone who had shown such a lack of integrity. Her children faced difficult questions from their classmates about their mother's legal troubles, forcing them to confront the consequences of her selfish choices. But perhaps the most effective consequence for Jessica was the recording I had made of her confession about intercepting legal mail and lying to federal authorities. I did not release the recording publicly, but I made sure she knew that I had documented evidence of her crimes that could be turned over to law enforcement if she ever attempted to interfere in my life or business again. You have one chance to rebuild your character and prove that you can be a trustworthy person, I told her during our final confrontation. But if you ever lie to me again, or if you ever try to manipulate our parents or hurt my business, I will make sure that recording finds its way to the appropriate authorities. The choice about your future is entirely up to you. The knowledge that I had leverage over her forced Jessica to fundamentally change her behavior in ways that apologies and therapy sessions never could have accomplished. She became genuinely committed to earning back the trust she had lost, not because she felt guilty about her past actions, but because she knew there would be serious consequences if she continued down the same destructive path. 6 months after implementing my plan for justice and accountability, our family dynamics had been completely transformed. Everyone was operating under new rules that required honesty, hard work, and genuine respect for each other's dignity and worth. The changes were not always comfortable, but they created a foundation for healthier relationships that could survive future challenges and conflicts. 1 year after that humiliating birthday dinner, where Jessica had given me the DNA test as a cruel joke, I found myself standing in the same upscale restaurant, but this time, the circumstances could not have been more different. I was hosting a celebration dinner for my adoptive father, who had just received recognition from the state accounting board for his ethical business practices and commitment to client service. My mother was there with her new confidence and communication skills that had developed through months of therapy. Even Jessica was present, having earned her invitation through genuine efforts to repair the relationships she had damaged. The transformation in our family dynamics had been remarkable to witness. My father had thrown himself into running the accounting firm with an energy and integrity that impressed both his employees and his clients. Without the security blanket of Harrison Webb's monthly payments, he had been forced to develop real business skills and build genuine relationships based on trust and competence rather than financial dependency. I feel like I am finally working for something I earned myself, he told me during one of our weekly business meetings. For 30 years, I was basically living off your inheritance without even knowing it. Now I get to take pride in every client we serve and every dollar we earn through honest work. The accounting firm had become more successful than ever before, specializing in helping small business owners navigate complex tax situations with complete transparency and ethical guidelines. My father had developed a reputation in the community for integrity that brought him clients from neighboring towns who were willing to drive an extra hour just to work with someone they could trust completely. My mother had blossomed during her therapy sessions, learning to express her feelings and set boundaries in ways that had transformed her relationship with everyone in our family. She had joined a support group for adoptive parents and had become an advocate for other families navigating the complex emotions and challenges that come with raising children who are not biologically related. I realize now that I spent so many years being afraid of losing you that I never really allowed myself to love you the way you deserved, she said during one of our regular coffee meetings. I was so focused on keeping you comfortable, and provided for that, I forgot to pay attention to whether you felt truly accepted and valued as part of our family. Jessica's transformation had been the most dramatic and difficult to achieve, but also the most meaningful for our family's long-term health. The public humiliation of having to confess her lies and manipulation in front of our extended family had been a turning point that forced her to confront the selfishness and cruelty that had characterized her behavior for years. She had enrolled in counseling sessions focused on developing empathy and learning to consider other people's feelings before acting on her own impulses. She had also begun volunteering with organizations that helped adoptive families using her experience with our family's dysfunction to educate other people about the importance of honesty and inclusion in blended families. I spent so many years being jealous of the attention and resources you received that I never stopped to think about how difficult it must have been for you to grow up feeling like you did not really belong anywhere. Jessica said during one of our monthly family dinners, "I was so focused on protecting what I thought was mine that I forgot we were supposed to be on the same side." Jessica's children, Emma and Lucas, had benefited enormously from the college funds I had established for them. But more importantly, they had learned valuable lessons about character and integrity from watching their mother work to repair the damage she had caused. They had both written me letters expressing their gratitude and their commitment to earning the educational opportunities I was providing for them. Caroline Mitchell had become not just a business partner, but also the sister I had never had growing up. Our shared experience of being Harrison Webb's children had created a bond that was based on understanding and mutual respect, rather than the financial obligations and family obligations that had complicated my relationship with Jessica for so many years. "Harrison would be so proud of what you have accomplished," Caroline said during the grand opening celebration for our third Webb luxury automotive dealership. "He always hoped that his children would use his resources to make the world a better place, and you have exceeded every expectation he could have had." The Harrison Webb Foundation that I had established had helped more than 50 adopted children reconnect with their biological families, providing DNA testing, legal assistance, and emotional support for families navigating the complex process of adoption searches. The foundation also provided scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in the automotive industry, honoring Harrison's legacy while creating opportunities for the next generation. My relationship with Sarah, my longtime girlfriend who had supported me through the entire ordeal with my family and inheritance, had deepened into something that felt permanent and unshakable. She had seen me at my angriest and most confused, but she had never wavered in her belief that I would find a way to handle the situation with wisdom and compassion. "You could have destroyed your family financially and emotionally," Sarah said as we planned our engagement party. "Instead, you found a way to demand accountability while still preserving the love that was real between you. That takes a level of maturity and forgiveness that most people never develop." The wedding planning had brought our transformed family together in ways that would have been impossible before the inheritance crisis forced everyone to confront their true feelings and motivations. Jessica was serving as the wedding planner, using her organizational skills to create a celebration that honored both my adoptive family and my biological heritage. My mother was helping Sarah with dress shopping and flower arrangements, finally able to participate in family milestone events without the anxiety and defensiveness that had characterized her behavior for so many years. Even my father had found a meaningful role in the wedding preparations, using his business connections to help us find vendors and negotiate contracts for the reception venue. His reputation for integrity had opened doors that might have been closed to us otherwise, and he took genuine pride in being able to contribute to our celebration through his own efforts and relationships. The evening of our family celebration dinner, as I looked around the table at the people who had raised me and the people who had hurt me, I realized that the DNA test Jessica had given me as a cruel joke had ultimately been the greatest gift I had ever received. It had revealed not just my biological heritage, but also the true character of everyone in my family, giving us all an opportunity to become better people than we had been before. The life lesson that emerged from our family's crisis was that true relationships are built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being, not on financial arrangements or biological connections. Justice served with mercy creates stronger bonds than revenge ever could, and people are capable of remarkable growth and change when they are held accountable for their actions, while still being offered hope for redemption. As I stood up to make a toast that evening, raising my glass to honor the family that had emerged from the ashes of our old dysfunction, I realized that Harrison Webb had given me more than money and business opportunities. He had given me the power to transform lives, starting with my own, and the wisdom to use that power in service of love rather than anger. The DNA test had answered questions about my parentage that had puzzled me for 32 years. But more importantly, it had taught me that family is not about genetics or financial obligations. Family is about choosing to love and support each other through difficult times, being honest, even when the truth is painful, and working together to create something better than what existed before. What do you think makes a family truly strong? Is it shared blood, shared experiences, or something deeper that connects us to the people we choose to call our own? I would love to hear your thoughts about family forgiveness and second chances in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of choosing justice over revenge. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about families, relationships, and the complicated ways we learn to love each other despite our imperfections. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I hope you find the courage to seek truth and healing in your own relationships, no matter how difficult that path might be.